I want to kind of share with you a story from a different part of the West, but one that is connected to this place today, and a story that is rooted in a particular year when the problems that overtook the Colorado River were in many ways the opposite of what so many of us are now struggling and wrestling with today. But a year which demonstrated a principle that remains equally relevant today and into the future, which is that, like it or not, we are not in control of this river to the extent that we are. And I think that this one particular year and a particular story that unfolded on the river demonstrates that in a very kind of visceral way. If I do my job correctly today, I will take you on a journey, a quick journey of about 30 minutes down the river with me, and introduce the notion that the Colorado River, as it flows through the Grand Canyon, is not only an extraordinary waterway, it's also a river of ideas that flow through this marvelous landscape. And I'm going to share with you some concerns I have about what's happening down there today. But let me start with a brief story about what took me to the river. I had no connection to the Grand Canyon whatsoever. I grew up back east in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And in the summer of 2003, the spring actually of 2003, I found myself in my pickup truck driving from my home in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where I worked as an editor at a little magazine called Outside. And I was headed down I-40, driving all night through a snowstorm, a late spring snowstorm, because I had signed on for what's called a WOOFR course, a Wilderness First Responder course, that was being conducted by a river outfitter in Flagstaff, a town I had never been to. And so I showed up in the outskirts of Flagstaff before dawn, and I drove up to a parking lot in front of a large metal building, which was the boathouse for this particular river outfitter. Got out of my truck, kicked the snow off of my boots, stepped through the doorway to this boathouse. And I don't know if this resonates with any of you out there today, but I'm 49 years old right now, and I know that there are very few moments, only a handful of them, that I can look back on in my life and identify as moments that represented a fundamental departure from the path of my life had been taking up to that point. A moment that represented a new direction in which everything that unfolded from that point would be different in some fundamental way. I think of these moments as crossroads moments or threshold moments. And this was one of them, and I'm going to share with you the three things that caught my eye as I walked into the boathouse that morning, starting with this. And there are also very few moments when I can say with all honesty that my jaw literally hit the ground, but there was something about these boats, the lines, the simplicity of the lines, the austerity of the shape of the boats, the brightness of the colors, and the fact that I suspect, in retrospect, that the boats themselves may have conformed in some way to an idea that I had framed inside my mind as a child of what a rowboat should look like. But I was stopped cold as I walked through the doorway and found this vision of these marvelous little rowboats staring at me from the opposite side of the boathouse. And I guess it's a testament to how transfixed I was by the beauty of these boats that it took a moment for my eyes to be pulled from them to the ceiling of the warehouse, where I realized after staring at it for a moment that I was being treated to a visual display of the savagery and violence that the Colorado River is capable of inflicting on these types of boats inside the Grand Canyon. And so in that moment, I was experiencing a very powerful and strange, I think, juxtaposition between two different responses. One aesthetic, and the other having to do with simply the physics and the hydraulics of water. The third thing I noticed, and it took a moment for this to catch my eye, because it was tucked all the way off the far corner of this boathouse, in a corner that was fairly dark, I didn't really know what I was looking at because I had to get right up underneath it in order to see the name of this particular craft. But this boat was suspended from the ceiling by these pieces of frayed nylon webbing. She was tilted at an angle that obscured her main. She was covered in dust. She was hanging over, you can't see it in this photograph, but she was hanging over a bench that was just festooned with used cans of paint and power tools. She looked completely neglected. And when I got close enough, I could see that somebody had stuck a piece of cardboard on the deck of this boat, which read, fastest lucky through Grand Canyon. And they'd drawn it in green magic marker and they'd put a couple of shamrocks on it. Now, as I said, I didn't know anything about the Grand Canyon. I mean, looking back on that moment, that morning, now, from a distance of 10 years, I suppose what really shocks me more than anything else is the depth of my own ignorance. Not only of these particular boats, but the environment for which they were built, and in which they really come into their own. My sole exposure to the Grand Canyon prior to this moment was to have read a book called Writing the Grand Canyon by an author named Margaret Henry, which I read when I was about 10 years old. Other than that, I never visited the place. I'd never walked up to it. I'd never looked into it. I had no connection whatsoever. And so I didn't know a few basic facts, starting with the notion that this is a 277-mile stretch of the Colorado River running across northern Arizona, which has carved what I think it is probably correct to identify as the most iconic piece of landscape that we have in the continental United States. A stretch of river and a piece of canyon, which in the minds of many, many Americans is viewed as being synonymous with the idea of wild nature, nature unfettered. And so I also did not know, nor did I appreciate at the time, the irony of the fact that this 277-mile stretch of river that many of us think of as the apogee, the emblematic statement of wild nature, is actually bookended by and buttressed between two of the largest technological statements that we've ever made, two of the largest and most impressive machines we've ever built. I'm talking, of course, about Hoover Dam at the downstream end with Lake Mead backing up behind it, and at the upstream end, the Glen Canyon Dam, of course, and Lake Powell. Now, I didn't know anything at the time, that morning in 2003. All I really knew was one thing, and that thing was that I wanted to, I basically wanted boats that could do this, and this, and this, to take me into this environment and show it to me. And so I ended up embarking on what I now recognize as both an irrational and monumentally stupid career change, because I can promise you that there are very, very few things that one can do to earn even less money than a freelance magazine writer, which is what I was at the time. But one of those is to apprentice yourself as a river guide at the bottom of the canyon. But that's what I decided to do. I signed on with this particular river company after finishing up the Woofer course. And really, I was embarking on a quest to fulfill a dream. Because, what I wanted really was I wanted to be that person in the driver's seat of one of these boats. Now, what I didn't realize at the time was that if, like anywhere else, if you want to, at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, if you want to sort of climb the hierarchy of river guiding, professional river guiding down there, you do not start in one of these wooden dories, which requires extraordinary skill sets to be able to handle those boats through those hydraulics safely, consistently, time after time. And so where you end up starting, I learned, is in this, which is what's called the baggage pull. These are the bulbous yellow rafts that in the company that I work for follow behind the dories, which contain the commercial passengers. Now, these baggage boats, they're incredibly important because they carry all of the equipment and gear and paraphernalia that's necessary to support and sustain a group of between 16 and 24 people for up to 23 days in the Grand Canyon. We're talking about, the kitchen, we're talking about all of the food, all of the tents, all the passengers' gear, all the passengers' clothing. But to give you an idea of where the baggage pool and people who rode these boats fit into the hierarchy down there was a tradition which remains true to this day that the dories of this company were given, they were named after natural wonders that have been destroyed by the hand of man. And so many of them bore beautiful names on the bows, on their bows, names like the Tickaboo, the Moki Steps, the Dark Canyon, all of which are features that lie beneath the waters of Lake Powell now. Some of these boats were named after rivers that had been stilled or dammed, such as the Skagit or the Okeechobee. So it's a wonderful tradition because it imbues the boats themselves with a haunted sense of longing and loss. The reason why this tradition was established by this company is to create the notion in the minds of the people who see and read those names that it might be important to think carefully before we throw natural wonders like those away again. Well, the baggage boats were not named after natural wonders. They did not have a haunting quality to them. They were named after barnyard animals. And we had 4 of them at the time. There was the mule, there was the ox, there was the Clydesdale, and then there was the boat that I became most closely associated with because I really can't believe that Jim Cook invited me to speak in front of a lunch because my boat had a particular function. And that function, those of you who have been on river trips will know that the National Park Service has a very strict set of regulations governing how human waste is controlled and contained and disposed of at the end of each trip, and that there's a boat on each river trip which is responsible for this. It's called the toilet boat. It carries what we call the groover, which is our toilet system. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail about what happens aboard that boat, except to say that this boat was called the Jackass. And the Jackass became my boat because the goal of every aspiring river guide inside the baggage pool is to claw his or her way out of the baggage pool as quickly as possible and get a guide seat in an oar raft or a dory. And unfortunately, and this is where the story of a dream really turns into the story of a tragedy, because I managed to demonstrate within the first several, I was going to say within my first season, but it was really within the first week or two. I managed to demonstrate such a colossal level of incompetency when it comes to the art of rowing whitewater that it was abundantly clear to myself and everybody else I worked with, my bosses, my colleagues, and the passengers, that I had no business holding the lives of commercial river clients literally in the palm of my hands. And so for the next 6 seasons, I became the captain of the Jackass. My nickname in the Grand Canyon, and it's still my nickname today, is Groover Boy. That's what I'm known as down there. And I never managed to get out of the off the deck of the Jackass and onto a dory. And so it's a story of an unfulfilled dream on my part. But there was one marvelous thing about it all, and that was that every member of a commercial river crew at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, regardless of whether you're rowing the toilet boat or you're the lead guide, every member of that crew gets to participate in a ritual that unfolds every day. The days down there can often be extremely long, extremely arduous. But right around the end of the day, as the light starts to angle toward the rim of the canyon, and darkness slowly begins creeping down the walls of the canyon, and the river itself is illuminated by this marvelous golden light. The guides gather on the decks of their boats, or if it's late fall or early spring, they gather around the campfire. This is a moment after dinner has been made, the kitchen's been put away for the night, the passengers have usually traipsed off to bed, the stars are about to come out, and the river guides in this moment, they do what river guides do better than anything else. And that's an impressive statement because, as those of you who are or who know river guides can attest, river guides do a lot of things really, really well. Unless they're me, they wrote whitewater extraordinarily well. They can cook under very difficult conditions for a large group of people and bang out 3 meals a day. Under different weather conditions, they can fix things that are broken without adequate tools. They can handle medical emergencies, but what they do better than anything else is they sit around and they tell stories. And those stories tend to run a gamut, which is to say that they exist on a kind of continuum. And on the one end of the continuum, these stories simply make up a fabric of oral history that is part of the subculture of piloting boats down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon. Right in the middle of that continuum is a bunch of kind of hyperbolic anecdotes. And then on the far end, they're just bald-faced lies. And all of these stories on this continuum come together around the campfire, around the decks of the boats. And if you sit long enough, and if you listen to enough of these, you'll begin to realize eventually, as I did, that so many of these stories either revolve around or thread back to one story of 1 year, one season, that looms larger than any other in the minds of the men and the women who have devoted what is the better part of their lives to piloting boats and taking people through the canyon. And that particular story is the story that I eventually latched onto and decided I wanted to bring to the larger world in the form of a book. It's not a story that I discovered because, as I said, you can sit around the campfire and hear about it, anybody who wants to go down there. But it's a story that had not fully made its way from the bottom of the canyon up to and beyond what we call the world beyond the rims, or the world above the rims. And it's a story that really begins with weather. And I have to say, there's no reason to have the slide up except for the fact that I think it's really, really cool. But it also, I think, it also serves as kind of a placeholder for me to just talk very, very quickly about weather in 1983. Because if you talk to meteorologists, they will tell you that 1983 was one of the most extraordinary years we've ever seen. And the main reason for that is that 1983 brought us the largest El Nino event on record up to that time. There have been larger El Ninos since then, but we've never seen anything. We've never seen an El Nino of this magnitude until 1983. We're talking about a series of meteorologic anomalies that were triggered actually at the tail end of 1982, on the far end of the western Pacific Ocean. And they began making their way across the Pacific, slamming into the west coast of the United States right around Christmas and New Year's in the form of what were called at the time superstorms. Huge torrential rainfall and storms that, after dumping that rain, made its way to the east and began slamming into the California Sierra. There was so much snow in the Sierra that year that took the standing snowfall record and buried it under an additional 6 feet of snow. More than 6 feet, actually. And the thing about the Sierra is that they're usually capable of bringing a lot of the moisture out of the storm systems that pass over them. But that year, there was those storms were so powerful, 1983, that the storms began passing over the Sierra and filling up the Great Basin. Lake beds and arroyos that hadn't seen water in years started becoming saturated and filling up. And then those storms collided up against our part of the world. Slammed into the southern Rockies, and began laying down a snowpack. And some people who know about it in 1983, there's a bit of a misnomer. People will tell you anecdotally that we had the largest snowpack in this part of the world that we've ever seen in 83. That's actually not quite true. The snowpack wasn't the largest, but what made it really unusual was that the temperatures that spring held very low until very late. And then on one day, May 28th, those temperatures shot up into the high 80s, and all of that snow came out of the mountains in one vast, huge, wet, uncontrollable rush. And it was all headed to one place, the upper tentacles of this reservoir. And this event descended on the upper basin so fast, and it hit the men who were in charge of this structure so unexpectedly that by the time they figured out how much water was coming down to them, the surface of this reservoir, and we're talking Lake Powell now, the surface of Lake Powell was clawing its way up the upstream face of the Glen Canyon Dam twice as fast as the engineers in charge of the structure were capable of releasing it through the penstocks or the river outlet tubes. Now, as we all know, Glen Canyon Dam, like many giant hydroelectric dams, is equipped with an insurance policy. And that insurance policy consists of two massive spillway tunnels that have been carved into the sandstone cliffs on either side of the dam, the east side of the dam and the west side of the dam. And they're protected by two enormous radio gates, a set of gates that determine how much water is released into the tunnels. So, right about the first week of June of '83, the Bureau of Reclamation opened up these radio gates and began employing the spillway tunnels of the Glen Canyon Dam. And the problem really began with the fact that they had never actually been able to take these spillway tunnels for a full-on test drive under flood conditions. And so a series of events were triggered, which is now referred to as the Spillway Crisis. At the heart of that spillway crisis, and this is the only schematic that I will inflict on you this afternoon, at the heart of the spillway crisis resides the fact that the spillway tunnels inside the dam take a rather abrupt turn. So the radio gates, the upper radio gates that determine how much and when water is released is right up here. Water then flows into and down this slope, which is about 55 degrees, until it hits this elbow joint. And then it's bent to almost a horizontal angle, and it passes for quite a distance before it reaches the portal of the spillway tunnel and encounters a structure known as a flip bucket, which is a wedge-shaped piece of concrete that basically looks like a giant ski jump. Now, it's hard to overstate how fast this water is moving inside a spillway tunnel like this and how much power it actually carries with it. But when the water is hitting that flip bucket and passing over that flip bucket, it's running at about 120 miles an hour. And the flip bucket, of course, is designed to throw that into the air and disperse as much kinetic energy as possible before the water falls back into the river at the base of the dam. I'm not going to go into too much detail about how this crisis unfolded or how they actually confronted it, except to say that it's a crisis that had no precedent in the history of American hydroelectric engineering. And to give you an idea of the magnitude of the events that were unfolding at the Glen Canyon Dam, I invite you to consider what the managers of the dam witnessed on the morning of June 6th as they came out onto the transformer deck at the base of the dam, power plant at the base of the dam, to look at the spillway tunnels and this arc of water that's formed. Now, the thing about this plume is that the water, as I said, is moving about 120 miles an hour. Under normal conditions, it's a kind of whitish-green color, and it's a very clear plume. They noticed two things on that particular morning. The first was that the plume itself was laden with debris. And at first they couldn't figure out what they were looking at, because it seemed to be very jagged objects, and then what looked like large sticks of tree limbs. What they realized after studying it for several minutes is that they were looking at jagged pieces of concrete, and the sticks and the tree limbs were pieces of rebar. What I failed to mention about the spillway tunnels is that those tunnels, two things about them. It's hard to overstate how enormous they are. We're talking a 40-foot diameter tunnel. That's 3 times the diameter of the London Underground, capable of inhaling a huge amount of water. The other thing is that those tunnels are lined with 3 feet of steel-reinforced concrete. And so what the objects being flung through the portal into this plume of water at 120 miles an hour, coming out of the tunnel like bullets from a gun, told them was that turbulence inside those tunnels was drilling into and excavating the lining of those tunnels. Second thing that truly horrified them was the color of the water. It wasn't clear, it wasn't whitish green, it was a pinkish tangerine color that perfectly matched the Navajo sandstone cliffs on either side of the dam. This told them is that the water was actually drilling into the abutments on the cliffs on either side of the dam that were responsible for supporting the 710-foot tall structure. The events that unfolded at the Glen Canyon Dam provide an extraordinarily dramatic narrative and a tale of engineers confronting and ultimately overcoming the problem of a runaway river and one of the largest hydroelectric dams in the West having its stability threatened. But the other thing that it did was it released an enormous amount of water downstream into the Grand Canyon. That summer they took the river from about 10,000 cubic feet per second to 93,000 cubic feet per second. It triggered a huge number of dramatic events on the river as the commercial and private river companies inside the canyon struggled to deal with those events. It also catalyzed a rather harebrained idea in the mind of this man. His name is Kenton Grua. And Kenton Grua was a river guide who had worked for the little dory company that I stumbled into when I enrolled in my Woodford course. And he had an unusual story and an attachment to a particular boat, a boat called the Emerald Mile. It was named after a stretch of virgin redwood, old-growth redwood trees in Northern California that a logging company had selectively clear-cut with the specific intention of rendering that grove inadmissible for any future national monument or national park. And the owner of this particular river company was so outraged he conferred that name, the Emerald Mile, on this boat. That boat in the summer of 1976 had undergone a rather horrible set of events. A river guide had made a grave mistake attempting to take her through Lava Falls, one of the biggest rapids in the canyon, and wound up in a feature called the corner pocket, which is a vicious eddy on the right side of the river. Once you're caught in it, it's very difficult to get out, and you slam up against a huge chunk of basalt called a big black rock with each rotation. This is what happened to the Emerald Mile after she'd been in there for about 25 minutes, and this is what she looked like after they got done repairing it. At this point, they were engaged in a salvage operation to get what was left of the boat out of the canyon. They were going to put it on the back of their rig truck and take it to the town dump outside of Hurricane, Utah, and give her a Viking funeral, which would consist of dousing her with gasoline and lighting her on fire as they pushed her off the truck into the municipal garbage dump. They pulled into the boathouse, however, before heading to the dump, and Kenton Grua saw what was about to take place, put his hands on his hips, shook his head, and said, "Nope, that's not going to happen. I'm going to take this boat, I'm going to make it my own, I'm going to rebuild her from scratch." And that's exactly what he did. This photograph was taken later that winter, in the midst of a sandwich break. And when he got done, he had something that nobody had ever seen before in the Colorado River inside of Grand Canyon, which is a boat with 2 sets of oarlocks, so she could be rowed simultaneously by 2 different people. She had self-bailing footwells, so she did not have to be bailed. A number of other features I won't go into right now, but she was ready to be launched later that spring with a bottle of champagne from Lee's Ferry. And so now, if we speed up the clock and return to 1983, Kenton Grua is sitting in the catbird seat. He's got an extraordinary skill set, ability to read whitewater. He's got a boat like no other, and he has an idea. And the idea is that if he can convince 2 friends to join him, a guy named Rudy Petchek, who's actually the guy who rode the Emerald Mile that was left out of the canyon after her disastrous encounter in Lava Falls, and another boatman by the name of Steve Reynolds, Wren, W-R-E-N like a bird, a ferociously competent whitewater boatman. If he and these 3 men took the Emerald Mile and put her illegally into the river at Lee's Ferry, because the Park Service would not sanction such an event, and timed it to the full moon, so June 25th, also timing it to what they hoped would be the crest of this artificial flood flowing down out of the Glen Canyon Dam by virtue of the Spillway Crisis taking place 15 miles upstream. And if those 3 men, if each man got behind the oars and rowed as hard as he possibly could for 20 minutes at a stretch until he could barely pull his fingers off the oarlocks and then turn the oars over to his companion, if these 3 men rotated around the decks of this little wooden dory day and night, rowing as hard as they possibly could, if they managed to surmount all of the obstacles that awaited them downstream in the darkness, that they might do something that had never been done before, which is to take a boat from Lee's Ferry, 277 miles through the Grand Canyon, all the way through to the Grand Wash Cliffs, punch themselves out onto the surface of Lake Mead, do so fast that they would not only break the standing speed record of the fastest boat ever to go through the Grand Canyon, but they would smash that record so decisively that it could never be broken again. That was the idea, and that's also what forms the story at the heart of this narrative. And what I'm going to do right now, partly just to give you a break from listening to me, is share a little video. It's about a 3-minute video. It's a book trailer, actually, which gives you an idea of how all these events come together. It was made by a friend of mine, Pete McBride, and it's got, because it's a device for selling books, it's got some very self-serving quotations about the book, which I encourage you to ignore. But let's take a look and see if this goes.
Deep in the desert, more than a mile beneath the surface of the earth, water and the passage of time have joined hands to sculpt one of the most monumental landscapes on our planet. The first of America's natural wonders to be discovered, the last to be explored, the Grand Canyon. In the basement of that abyss lies a hidden, mysterious wilderness. For 6 million years, this world was ruled by an outlaw, a renegade force of nature, answering to no one, until an army of engineers wedged one of the largest machines ever conceived into the gateway of the canyon. To tame the largest free-flowing river in the West, the Colorado. In the spring of 1983, a reckoning descended on the Glen Canyon Dam. A record snowpack, melting all at once, raced from the Rockies. In the midst of the chaos that the water brought, a legend was born. As the reservoir inched closer to the rim of the dam, the canyon below was transformed into a rock-walled maelstrom. Wrecked boats, stricken passengers, the missing, the injured, the dead. Amid the carnage and the confusion, beneath the glow of a full moon, a trio of intrepid river guides cast off in a tiny wooden boat and rocketed downstream on an epic quest that was illegal, wrong-headed, and glorious. A bid to ride the crest of the largest flood in living memory through the most ferocious whitewater in North America and catapult a little dory called the Emerald Mile into history as the fastest boat ever propelled by oar, by motor, by the grace of God through the heart of the Grand Canyon.
So that's kind of the story of the Emerald Mile, and I think I've got about 10 minutes, 5 minutes left. But I want to share with you very quickly. The thing about the Grand Canyon, and this is a bit of a paradox, is that it's the crown jewel of America's national park system, and partly by virtue of its architecture. I'm talking, of course, about those soaring mile-high walls of rock that go back 1.7 billion years to the past. This is a place which looks permanent, which looks inviolable, which looks impervious to any threat or change. An idea which is underscored by the illusion that the canyon is protected by a bureaucratic and a legislative wall which cannot be breached. Turns out that that's not true. Canyon's been subjected to a number of threats in the past that I won't go into right now, but it is beset right now by a number of things that are of great concern to people who care about it very deeply. And it's a story that really begins with this particular structure, which is known as the Skywalk. It's built on the western side of Grand Canyon on the Hualapai Reservation. It's a structure that has a glass walkway to look out onto a tributary. Most river guides refer to it as the toilet seat, actually, because of what you can see in this photograph. This is an idea of where we're talking about. Right over here. The thing about that particular structure is that the people who conceived the idea and took it to the Hualapai in the first place only saw that as the wedge for something much more extensive. And that entailed successfully petitioning the FAA to open up a very significant stretch of the Western Grand Canyon corridor to helicopter flights. And so what we started noticing several years ago was an increasing number of flights, which were not just flying around, but also depositing passengers on the ledges above the river. And with time, the number of these flights and the number of aircraft you could see either in the sky or parked on the ledges began to grow. And as those numbers increased, so too did the noise and the sense of disruption that they brought with them. But that was really only the beginning. What the Hualapai then did was to construct a set of docks on their side of the river and a set of ramadas and offer boat tours. So now the helicopters were bringing in people who would then begin boating on the river. And with time, the amenities that they started offering to passengers, and most of these passengers are people from Las Vegas, many of them foreign tourists from places like China, for example, who really want to see the Grand Canyon. The amenities they started offering became more and more sophisticated to the point where the entire western side of the Grand Canyon was essentially turned into a playpen. Now, some of you out there might say, well, how bad is it really? It's bad enough that I have friends who are backpacking guides in Flagstaff who've been doing this for 20 years who no longer take their clients into the Western Grand Canyon. You can hear helicopters constantly and watch them overhead. Most river guides I know, most private boaters I know, will float this stretch only at night. They compare this stretch to the opening scene of MASH or Apocalypse Now. And the person who is really the person who really brought this idea to life is a developer from Phoenix by the name of Lamar Whitmer. This is a picture of him. And what Whitmer is now attempting to do is to take what he did at the Hualapai Reservation and shift his focus all the way over to the eastern side of the Grand Canyon, where the Navajo Reservation abuts the canyon. And he is focused on a particular part of the canyon, an exquisite part of the canyon. We're approaching it from upriver here, which is known as the Confluence. It's where the waters of the Little Colorado flow into, meet, and merge with the mainstem Colorado. The waters of the Little Colorado are a unique color. It's a kind of turquoise color that makes you feel as if you are in a desert version of the Caribbean. This particular site, the Confluence, is sacred to many Native American tribes, not just the Navajo, but the Hopi, the Zuni, and they're kind of sacred. It's a sacred site to our tribe as well. This is where, what I think of as my tribe, where John Wesley Powell penned his famous phrase that was reported about, "Now we're about to venture into the great unknown." And what Lamar Whitmer is going to do, with Navajo approval, is to build at the on the rim, directly looking down on the Confluence itself, a massive cable-driven tramway, which will go all the way to the floor of the canyon. This is a set of gauntlet cars that can handle up to 8 people at a time. And this system will be able to deliver 10,000 people per day down to the bottom of the Grand Canyon, where they will be able to walk along an elevated walkway to the Confluence. If you want to see what it looks like, this is a kind of Photoshop rendition of what it's going to look like if you're staring at it from upriver. And at the end of that walkway, they are going to build a restaurant at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. To say that this is a travesty is, if anything, an understatement. The interesting thing, and I think the tragic thing, however, is that it's a great example of white developers coming onto a reservation and not only trying to exploit the economic desperation of the tribe, of Indians that's been trying to figure out how to develop for many years, but simultaneously creating great divisiveness within the tribe itself. And so now you have members of the Navajo Nation who support the project and members of the Navajo Nation who are opposed to the project. And I just wanted to kind of bring this to your attention because I think it represents something that is probably the greatest threat that we have seen in at least 2 generations to the crown jewel of the American National Park System. There are a group of environmental organizations that are scrambling right now to put together a strategy to try and both counter this and also work with the Navajo to explore the possibility of the idea that there might be a better way to develop. Here are 3 of them. If you're interested, you can go to the websites of these 3 particular groups. And I think I'm out of time, and I apologize for taking so much time. I really thank you, though, for listening to me. And I'm going to be around all afternoon, and so if anybody has any questions, or if anybody fundamentally disagrees with anything I've said, feel free to buttonhole me and let me know your thoughts. Okay? Thank you.